Hey everybody, Keylime here, this time with a different kind of video. I figured I would make a top 10 most valuable troops in the game video. So this is different than the tier list video that I put out for all the Mythics. This video is obviously going to consider all troop types that are in the game, but it's also a little bit of a different perspective. So this isn't going to say these are the absolute best troops in the game. These are just the highest value troops in the game in terms of what they bring to the table, where you can potentially use them, what types of teams they unlock you to be able to make. This video is really going to prioritize who's the most important to get and who's the most important to use as often as you can. So that's kind of the perspective. So it's going to be a little bit of a different list. You're going to see it doesn't follow my tier list directly. It doesn't follow a lot of conventional thinking. But in my opinion, getting these troops is going to enable you to create all the fun teams that you could possibly want to make. They are the highest value, they bring the most to the table. So here we go. We're going to start with number 1, which is Ms. Divine Ishbala. So on paper, when you look at just her ability, she looks like a very standard troop. She's transforming red to skulls and green to yellow, enchanting a couple allies. As far as the skull converter goes, this is fine. There's nothing about this that's particularly exciting. So there's tons of troops that do this type of property. Enchanting is not even that strong of a buff, admittedly. Like, I personally don't find enchant to be all that exciting. 2 mana every turn is kind of weak mana generation as far as I'm concerned. But what makes her so strong is this radiant aura. So as you may or may not know, in the game, there's a ton of divine troops, there's a ton of high value divine troops, and being able to have somebody in your lineup that starts them with 40% mana is extremely strong. So if we just take a look at troop type divine, let's not pass it. If we go troop type divine and do the base rarity sort, let's see what kind of divines we can do. Oh look, it's Infernus, it's in Pharaoh's Ra, it's Queen Aurora, it's Voice of Orpheus, it's Yasmin's Chosen, it's her herself, it's Quillen, it's Divinia, it's Mercy, even though she starts with full mana. So it's like, in terms of the troops that are really high tier, like Infernus is extremely high tier, Pharaoh's is used in a lot of different capacities. I'm starting to realize I can use him in PvP sometimes. Queen Aurora is really nice, Voice of Orpheus is really nice, Yasmin's Chosen is really nice, Divinia is really nice, Quillen is very nice. All of these troops are very high value and can be used in a lot of different capacities, and someone like Divine Ishbala is going to be able to get you all of these troops to start with mana even sooner. So those really strong troops that are divine are enabled to start your lineups a lot faster. So you'll find that there's a ton of great divine troops, and having someone like Divine Ishbala is just going to enable you to start using those troops a lot faster than you normally would be. So really strong troop. If you're able to pick her up, she kind of enables a lot of different kinds of lineups. So as far as skull converter type troops, obviously they are all very cool in their own respect, but as far as all of them are concerned, I would argue Ishbala is the most effective one that you could possibly add to your lineup. So she takes the 10th slot as far as our list is concerned. My next one is going to be very unconventional, so it's going to be Leprechaun. It is a very strange troop to put in this list, admittedly. He's not very hard to get, but I think he's undervalued in terms of what he brings to the table. As far as mana generation goes, he explodes the board and gets you a bunch of mana right off the bat. He's empowered, of course, so he can just start. You're getting bonus green mana. It doesn't feel like he's this amazing, awesome troop, but the thing that's kind of sneaky about him, and that's not so obvious, is that when you're looking at a class like, let's just say Titan, for instance, if I can swing over to Titan, and we look at his talents, we get the Storm Aura, which is starting the battle with the Dust Storm. So what that means is that when you have Leprechaun in your team, all you have to do is blow up the board at the start of the game, and now the entire board looks exactly like how you want it to. So all of a sudden the entire board is littered with brown on turn 1. So mana generation is extremely strong, and your team is ready to go right away. So having somebody like Leprechaun is going to enable a lot of different lineups. There's different classes that will start with different storms. There's just different troops that will start with different storms. If you're running a Sun Spear, for instance, and you're running this Firestorm every single turn, blowing up Leprechaun at the start of the fight is just going to make the entire board red right from the jump. So in terms of what he brings to the table, an insanely high value troop. He's going to enable your lineups to just start that much faster. Everything about what he's doing is just really, really, really nice. So again, very unconventional, but as far as value troops go, He's extremely high value as far as I'm concerned. Pop him in a bunch of different lineups that you already have where you're struggling with mana generation. If you have any kind of storm running, Leprechaun is going to make that team a lot better. And it doesn't take very much to fill him back up, so you can just be popping him off all the time, and it's a really good time. So Leprechaun takes my number 9 slot. Very, very useful troop, can be used all over the place, isn't restricted by troop type, nothing like that. Next, what we have, if my typing is ever going to improve, is Webspinner. So Webspinner, again, when you just look at what he does, this looks pretty cool. So he's doing 16 all, which is very low for what it's worth. But then he's creating 9 green. 9 green is actually pretty solid. This is looking pretty decent already. His pictures look pretty nasty. But when we look over at this section, this is where things get stupid. So he's inflicting web when he does skull damage, and then he does triple skull damage to poisoned and webbed enemies. So what this actually means is it actually does this trait then this trait when you hit somebody. So you'll quickly see that they got webbed, and then all of a sudden they're dead. Having Webspinner in your first slot just means that anytime you hit someone with a skull, it's going to hurt. Like, it is going to kill. More often than not, it is just going to kill. And that's just a very passive match, like 3 skulls. It doesn't have to be a critical hit. It doesn't have to be doom skulls. It's just match skulls, and probably whatever you just hit is dead. I don't have to tell you that matching skulls is not very hard to do. You can obviously build lineups that force skulls onto the board. It's very common to try and pair him with some kind of skull conversion lineup, or just some kind of empowered skull conversion lineup. Anything that just allows him to start hitting people with skulls. Having someone like Webspinner is going to enable you in the early game to be able to just decimate anybody that you want. He's also going to be able to generate mana to help fill himself. If you pair him up with other people that are making green mana, he's going to just be that much more effective. You can potentially get the other team caught in this loop where they just cannot get out of it, and Webspinner just happens to be smacking people all the time. So in terms of value, he's really, really strong. You don't have to try and even build anything special around him. Just having him passively in the top slot, just hitting people, you're going to get a lot of free kills just for that. So in terms of valuable troops in the game, he's able to be fit into a lot of lineups. You can do a lot of cheeky things with him. He's not someone that gets as much airtime as I think he deserves. I admittedly don't even use him as much myself, but I've noticed that since I've started putting him in lineups, my success rate has gone up, certainly in Guild Wars defenses, for instance, and even on attack teams, I'm learning that I can be using him a lot more effectively. So I'm going to go ahead and throw Webspinner in the 8th slot, which is going to bring us to our boy Yao. So Yao is, I think, should be a mythic. The fact that his mana cost is what it is, the fact that his abilities are what they are, it is kind of crazy that he is somehow just a legendary with this much mana cost. So when we look at his ability, this is all crazy. So he's doing 24 damage to 2 people, which doesn't feel like a lot, but it's boosted by his life by a 3-to-1. So if we look at mine, he's going to be doing an extra, 32 attack to this. So he's hitting 2 people for 56 damage, so he's doing 112 damage right off the bat, and then he's also stealing magic from both of them, so that means that he's gaining 8 extra damage to this every single time you cast him, and he's transforming all purple gems to red. So he's mana converting so he can loop, he's hitting 2 people really hard, he's stealing magic as he's doing it, and every single time you match red gems, he's stealing 3 life from the first enemy. So he's constantly boosting his own life. He's constantly stealing from the top troop. You're constantly converting reds, which synergizes with his trait. You're stealing magic, and you're doing a ton of damage. So in terms of Yao, if you have Yao in your lineup, I'm sure you've faced a Yao, or if you have Yao, you know how this works, but if you see purples and reds together and Yao is full, you just feel like you lost. You gave them the perfect setup. He's going to cast, he's going to loop, and he's probably going to cast again, and whoever was in your top 2 slots are dead. It is over for those 2 people. So Yao is extremely strong, easily the highest value legendary I think you can probably get. I say that knowing that I have at least one other legendary above him, but in terms of what he brings to the table, he is just insanely strong. Which brings us to the other legendary that I'm going to rank above him, actually. So this is Glaceon. So Glaceon is probably one of my most used troops. I'm kind of shocked he isn't listed as one of my most used troops. I know why he's not, but I use Glaceon pretty much as often as I possibly can because I consider him to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest, like single value troop in the game. So what he's doing is he's transforming yellows to blues, which offers him no synergy per se. He's not converting anything into himself, but he's converting reds into Doomskulls. So converting into Doomskulls is so important compared to converting into regular skulls. A lot of folks may not know, but if your attack is 0, if you're entangled, it doesn't matter. Doomskull damage is still going to punch through. The attack part isn't going to punch through, but the actual Doomskull part of it is. So if you cast Glaceon and you end up creating 10 Doomskulls and they all explode, that's still going to do 50 damage. And, you know, if he wasn't entangled or had his attack reduced, he's going to be doing like 86 damage. So when you cast him, you're going to be looping the board almost certainly. You're going to be doing a crap ton of damage to whomever's in the top slot. Like, generally the way I think of it is when I cast Glaceon, I expect the top troop to die. Like, they're just going to die. And then you freeze somebody on top of that. When, to me, freeze is probably one of the best debuffs you can place on the enemy team. When you freeze the other team, you ruin their loop potential. You're hitting somebody super hard. You probably killed somebody. You're converting mana for people below him. And on top of all of that stuff, he takes reduced damage from skulls himself. So and this percentage is not insignificant. 65% is one of the stronger percents in the game. So he's extremely skull resistant himself, and he has an ability to pump his own attack whenever the enemy hits you with skulls. So when the enemy hits you with skulls, you're going to be taking a major reduction to that. You're going to be building up your own attack. When you cast him, you're getting mana for everybody below him. You're creating Doom Skulls instead of regular skulls, which makes the damage so high. And you're freezing the strongest troop that's on their lineup, which ruins their loop potential. So somebody like Glaceon in your lineup, if you can build around him, you should always have him in the top slot if you're going to run him. It's very rare that you would put him not in the top slot. Sometimes on like Guild Wars Brown Day, you might put him underneath a Mountain Crusher or something like that. But in general, Glaceon in your lineup, like if you can just build anything around Glaceon, you're going to be extremely successful, almost kind of regardless of what you do below him. If you can just get one good Glaceon cast off, the other team is in like the most traumatic experience of their life. So Glaceon, extremely high value troop. If you're able to pick him up, you're going to be able to build very, very effective lineups around him. Next would be Mr. Obsidius. So in terms of Obsidius, his ability is actually really, really nice. So destroying a 5x5 block means you're getting 25 mana gems destroyed, which means you're going to be getting 25 mana potentially. Any skulls you're doing in there are obviously doing their damage, but you're creating a ton of mana just by casting his ability. Of course, that gives you loop potential because new mana gems are going to be dropping down. If you have a storm running, you're probably going to create a loop as a result of this cast, so you're not going to necessarily give up your turn when you cast him. He's doing 37 heavy splash damage, so for folks that aren't aware, when he was released, they introduced this concept of heavy versus light splash damage. So heavy splash damage means the initial person you hit with it is going to be taking the full 37, and then the two people next to them are going to be taking 75% of that damage. So, I mean, I don't know what 75% of 37 is. It's probably roughly, Let's just say it's about 27. That sounds about right. So you're going to be hitting one dude for 37, the other two dudes next to him for 27. So he's doing like a total of 100 damage just with his cast. You're getting a ton of mana as a result. Oh, and then there's this other chance to be doing 37 light splash damage to a random enemy, which means the initial hit to the troop is doing 37, and then the two troops next to them are getting hit for 25% of that damage. So, you know, roughly like 10 damage. So, I mean, in terms of like raw damage, he's actually really, really high. In terms of mana generation, he's actually really high. And then when we get over here, he's also very skull reduction oriented, so he's taking a 50% reduction, which is really, really nice. It's hard to put him in the top slot, admittedly, but if people knock your team down to Obsidius, he's going to be able to take some skulls. But then this is what kind of like puts him over the top. So he's stunning all enemies on 4 or 5 gem matches. As you know, stun, as you can read up here, when a person is stunned, all of their traits turn off, and when you hit a hero with it, all of their talents turn off as well. So if you're going up against an annoying Orb Weaver team that's summoning spiders all over the place, you're going to be turning that ability off. If somebody was stealthy, you're turning that off. If somebody has skull reduction themselves, you're turning that off. So being able to stun the enemy basically means that whatever that troop is just their stats and their ability. Everything on this card for that troop is completely removed. So it's extremely great. Something else that's kind of sneaky about him is this summoning a dust storm when an enemy dies. So this would seem to imply you want to basically run him in a more brown-oriented lineup. I honestly have no trouble running him in a red mana type lineup. However, just be aware that when you kill people, a dust storm's going to come up. This can either be very useful or potentially somewhat frustrating. But in terms of what he brings to the table, it's mana generation, really good damage. The utility of this Earthquake is extremely strong. And then he just has some extras. So having Obsidian in your lineup, especially in PvP and Guild Wars, is going to be extremely effective. A lot of the teams these days that you're going up against depend on their traits to be doing annoying stuff. Someone like Obsidian just says, yeah, no, I'm not going to let you do that. Turns it all off, and then you just get to run, whatever kind of situation you want against that team. Extremely high value troop if you can build them into your lineups. Next is going to be, at least for me personally, probably the most controversial thing that I'm going to put in here. So everybody else that makes tier lists puts High King Iron Gut really high, S tier, and I get it, of course. I understand why they do this. And that's the reason why he's in this list as number 4. So High King Iron Gut is somebody that is going to basically enable you to do delving, in an extremely effective, efficient way. So as far as a troop in all of their aspects of the game, he has uses in events as well, so he's got some value there. But his true value is really coming in delves. And of course that's because he's basically taking his attack, so whatever your attack is, he's turning that into a chance to devour. And you get an extra turn when you cast him. So what that really means is that when you're doing a delve, as long as you've gotten your treasure hoard up to a decent amount, his stats are going to be close to 50% when you're at the end game. But even if it's not, you're going to have at least a 40% chance, even a high 30% chance, to devour people. It's not overly complicated to find troops to pump his attack. So all you need to do is devour one person when you're delving, and then now he's just devouring every single turn. So it doesn't matter how hard or crazy the other team's lineup is. It doesn't matter if they're level 500. It wouldn't matter if they're level 1,000. Someone like High King Iron Gut is just basically going to open up the world of delving to you, where it's kind of like easy mode at that point. It's just build a team around High King Iron Gut and then win. That's basically what delving becomes for you at that point. You may have to deal with some invulnerable troops to devour, and in that use case, you can use somebody like a Sledge Paw to curse and stun them so you can devour them anyway. You can use someone like a Queen Jezebel who's just going to take all of the fun attack that you've got with High King Iron Gut and just blast people for that much damage, so if they're immune, you can just hit them super hard anyway. There's ways you can kind of get around that if you're up against invulnerable teams to devour. But the reason why he's number 4 in this list is because he just makes delving that much easier. And delving, of course, just allows you to get all the ingots in the world. It also allows you to get shards, which allows you to get to the new troops. So delving is a very important aspect of the game. So of course, someone like High King Iron Gut is going to rank highly in this list just for that reason alone. Again, the reason he's not super high in my tier list is that he's only useful in delves and in some events. So in terms of overall value as far as my tier list goes, he's not going to rank as high. But in terms of value, having delves be pretty complicated to having delves be easy farm mode, extremely important. So that's going to put High King Iron Gut as number 4 in my list. His traits are really nothing all that exciting to talk about. The stealing 4 life on Browns is kind of cool, but admittedly you kind of forget about this. You'll kill people randomly sometimes and you remember this is there, but you're not using him for this. You're using him for this. So High King Iron Gut, number 4 in the list. Mark it down. It's probably no surprise to anybody that's going to put Infernus at number 3 on my list. So similar to Obsidian, I kind of view Obsidian and Infernus as kind of interchangeable in some ways. It really just depends on what you're trying to do, but Infernus kind of operates pretty similar in terms of his damage output to Obsidian, in the sense that he's doing 37 damage, at least in my game, to 2 people. So he's going to be hitting 2 people with 37 splash damage. So again, that means the first person's taking 37, and then the 2 next to them will be taking half of that. So what, 19-ish? Something like that. And then, so in terms of total damage, he's basically doing over 100 damage every single time you cast him, total damage. So you're going to be popping barriers all over the place. You're going to be doing a good amount of damage to everybody. He's exploding 5 gems, which is pretty much enough to get a good portion of the board to be jumbled around. So you're going to get a lot of loot potential out of this. I'll just say as a general strategy again, make sure you're running storms if you're using a lot of explosions. If you're using a lot of explosions without storms, you're not really using explosions effectively. Explosions work the best when there's storms running, because that will just increase the odds of 4 or 5 matches happening as a result of the gems coming down. So he's kind of doing everything you really want a troop to do. He's doing really good amounts of damage. It's targeted damage versus AoE damage, meaning that even if somebody's submerged, for instance, he's still going to be able to hit them regardless. If somebody is stealthy, he could still potentially hit them anyway, because he's not doing targeted damage, it's just targeting a random person. So he's able to just kind of like hit people no matter what kind of situation they're in. And beyond all of that, he's looping. So in terms of just his spell cast, this is just extremely effective. I know that the damage output doesn't feel as amazing. Like, you're probably thinking, well, Tina does way more damage than he does. Like, Tina can just kill somebody turn 1 if you want, and Furnace will never do that. And you're not wrong. But the difference is that Tina's damage is insanely strong only if it hits the same person like 3 times in a row on turn 1, which of course statistically is extremely rare. It does happen, of course, but it's extremely rare. And she doesn't have any loop potential. Someone like Infernus is basically doing everything you want. He's hitting everybody, he's doing really solid damage, he's exploding the board for extra mana, and on top of that, whenever you kill people, he creates a firestorm, so then it becomes even easier for him to loop into himself whenever you explode the board. And if you're not running a firestorm anyway, if you didn't have storms as part of your lineup, this will enable you to start using Infernus even more. But then you get into this conflagration thing, which kind of becomes this crazy X Factor thing for a couple of reasons. So the first more obvious reason is that burning everybody isn't necessarily like the strongest thing on the planet, but what you can see here is that they're taking 3 damage every turn. So 3 damage every turn, while it doesn't feel crazy, it's just like a passive 12 damage constantly to the other team. Something else that's a little sneaky about this is that if they're barriered, for instance, and they have no more armor, if they just have health, burning somebody will actually remove their barrier every single turn when they take that burn damage. So it's kind of like creating this really annoying situation for the other team where if they're trying to be very defensive, Infernus is not really allowing them to be. But then what this also enables is for classes that have access to the fire tree, the level 100 talent there is Fireblade, which means that anybody that's burning is going to be taking triple skull damage from your hero. So if you have someone like a Dragon Guard, if you have a Warlord, if you have a Sun Spear, you're going to be able to just obliterate people. The moment you match any 4-5 match, you're just going to be enabling triple skull damage for your hero on top of it. Never mind this cool spell that we just talked about. You're just enabling triple skull damage potentially on top of all of that. So Infernus is just somebody that you can use him all the time. He's never a bad decision. If you have Infernus in your lineup, it's probably going to be better in a lot of different ways. His spellcast is very useful, it's very safe, it potentially loops, does a lot of cool stuff. You can potentially enable a lot of really sick combos just because of this burning. And again, even if you're not taking advantage of Fireblade, you're at least getting that utility from the burning, which is just a passive 3 damage every turn and potentially popping barriers on top of that. And if you kill people, he makes himself more loopable because you're running a Firestorm, which naturally he is able to absorb. So Infernus, extremely high value. I'm sure you already know this, but again, probably top 3 troop for sure. He's taking the number 3 slot. This next one is probably the most controversial, but I'm going to stand behind it fiercely. So, let's see if you can figure out who it's going to be. Converting gems, sorting by, drumroll, empowered. It's empowered converters, all of them. All of them are the number 2 slot. So maybe this is a cop-out. I could certainly rank all of these for you guys. But the main point that I want to make with empowered converters is that all of these are insanely high value. Every single one of these troops, outside of maybe the skull converters, are just the highest value troops outside of the top troop that you can possibly put in your lineups. And the reason for this is mana generation and speed. So if we look at somebody like Gimlet, he starts with full mana and he converts mana gems. So if you look at, just my number, 6 troop in the list, Glaceon, and then you look at Gimlet, we have a dude who's giving Glaceon a ton of brown mana, he's giving Glaceon extra life, and he's enraging him, which means that all the skulls that he's going to be creating will smack that much harder, and he can do all of that on turn 1. So someone like Gimlet in your lineup enables you to take someone like Glaceon and start casting Glaceon immediately. So that is insanely strong, and that's just looking at one combo. Gimlet, any troop that you have that's brown, Gimlet is going to enable them to be doing stuff way faster than they could have otherwise. Same goes for all of these troops. They all work that way. So it doesn't matter what color you're constantly trying to make. The only color that you can't currently make in this fashion is green. There's nobody that can turn things instantly to green. However, there's yellow, there's purple, there's blue, there's skulls even, there's brown, there's blue, there's red. There's somebody to do the color that you want. And having these people in your lineup is always a good decision. There's pretty much never a reason to not have one of these people in your lineup unless you have an extremely effective other way of getting mana. And I would argue that that way is probably not going to be as good as one of these people. So putting one of these people in your lineup, always going to make your team better. It's going to make your team faster. It's going to make your mana generation much more reliable. All of these people are extremely effective. I will quickly rank them, I guess, for you, or at least tell you which ones are super valuable. Daughter of Ice is super valuable. The Ice Storm that she can make is really nice. She's able to take reds and turn them to blue, so she was just recently released, very high value. Mercy is very high value because she'll cleanse everybody every time you cast her, and she's turning purples to yellows. She enables a lot of teams like the Divine Ishbala Rope Dart team that I'm sure you run into. Same type of deal with Moonrabbit. So Moonrabbit is blessing your first troop, so that means if like your team depends on having your first troop able to do skull damage, for instance, Moonrabbit will protect them by blessing them. Blessing them makes them immune to all status effects and also cleanses them when it gets cast. So these two are very, very strong defensive-oriented troops with creating yellow mana. Gimlet, again, as I mentioned, is basically your like super tank builder guy. He's going to be making your first troop just do tons of skull damage, giving them extra life. You're more than likely going to be having somebody up there that's either getting benefit from barrier from browns like a Titan class or a Sentinel or a Rune Priest even, or a Plague Lord if you're running that, giving them extra life, making them do more skull damage, so he's also extremely useful. And then I'll just throw in Taipan. Even though his spellcast does like nothing useful at all, poisoning a random enemy is so trash I can't even describe it. Being able to create a ton of red mana is obviously very important. Even though his spell ability doesn't do that much, to me at least, converting a bunch of red mana specifically is so important. So all of these are extremely effective. All lineups in the game will be better by them being in it. They're not super hard to get. They're all epic level. But if you're not building lineups with these people in them most of the time, I would probably argue your lineup is not as efficient as it could be. So that is why Empowered Converters, number 2 on my list. Probably controversial, but I would stand behind that wholeheartedly. My answer to most people when they ask me questions about team building is, what is the troop that you're trying to build around, and what Empowered Converter are you going to be putting in that lineup? Just by doing that, you've already got a really good base for how you're going to build a team. So, super high value. Probably said enough about that. And then, probably to nobody's surprise, the number 1 troop, spoilers, is the Possessed King. And the reason why I have him as my number 1, and I'm constantly disappointed that I seem to be one of the few that are beating this drum, is that he will make every lineup you put him in better. And the reason for that, of course, is this unstable possession. So the way that I think about the Possessed King is like, this should basically say on every 4 or 5 match, there's a chance you just fill everybody with mana and kill a bunch of people, because all of these explosions are going to be blowing up the board, randomly matching skulls, randomly matching gems, blowing up again, randomly matching skulls, randomly matching gems, exploding again, randomly matching skulls, randomly matching gems. So it's like, if there's a storm running of any kind, if there's a skull storm running, if there's a doom storm running, if there's a firestorm running, every single time you get a 4 or 5 match, you're going to be blowing up the board and doing it again. So the amount of loops that you can enable with the Possessed King in your lineup are just stupid. Like, if you have any kind of looping lineup, whatsoever, and Possessed King is in it, that lineup is just going to go bananas. Like, I can't even tell you. Anyone who's watched my stream with Possessed King in it has probably seen me just blowing up the board a crap ton, getting a ton of mana as a result. You know, you'll just do a random 4 or 5 match that looks pretty harmless or ineffective, and then all of a sudden there's like 2 troops dead and all of your people are full mana because you just blew up the board a trillion times. And I know what you're thinking. That probably doesn't happen that much, right? Like, you know, it's only 2 gems. Like, what's the big deal? It's a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is because storms exist. So when storms exist and you're matching 4 or 5 gems and your lineup is already built around looping, that 4 or 5 match is going to enable potentially a ton of crazy stuff to happen. But even if it doesn't, the rest of your lineup is probably built around looping anyway. So then you cast somebody else, which potentially starts the slot machine again. So having Possessed King in your lineup just makes your team that is already built around looping loop way harder, way faster, be way more effective. Even if you're frozen, let's just say, and let's say your Yao is frozen and you match a 4 or 5 of red, all of a sudden the board can blow up a bunch, and you would have only gotten that one match before, but now because you have Possessed King, you're going to be blowing up the board, blowing up the board, blowing up the board, and even though you were frozen, you still got everybody full mana. You still lost your turn, or maybe you didn't, because all of those random explosions, you may have just magically matched 4 or 5 blues, and now suddenly you're fine. You're still getting so much value out of it. So it's kind of like, I can't understate how important this actually is. If you've run Possessed King in your lineups before, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I think people really undervalue how important this is. Like, people say you only put Possessed King in your lineup for just this, and that makes them say it's like, well, that makes him not very good. This makes him insanely good. Like, you could never touch this spell ever, and this alone would still make him a must-have as far as adding value to your lineups go. But then, beyond all of that, his spell is actually sneakily effective, or sneakily interesting. So when it comes to the damage part, this is like the worst part about him, admittedly. Like, his damage is not very good, and the boost is so poor that even trying to build him in an all-demon lineup only makes this, like, somewhat better. It's still really bad. Basically, you're only ever casting this spell if you're in a really bad situation and you need to transform something. That's the only reason you ever cast a spell. So if you're in a situation where you can tell you're going to lose, like, you see that the other team is super advantaged over you, you have Possessed King full because you've probably never cast him in the entire fight, and you're saying, okay, there's no way I'm going to be able to win this. How can I possibly win this? Well, you cast Possessed King and you see what happens, right? You roll those dice, and you have 3 different chances to have a 20% chance to transform somebody. So what that means is sometimes you'll transform 1 person, sometimes that means you'll transform 3 people, sometimes that means you'll transform 2 people, sometimes that means you'll transform the same person twice. Like, if they're down to 2 enemies and you cast them, it's possible they'll transform this troop once, and then transform this troop, and then transform this troop again. You'll probably have a hard time actually seeing that, but you can tell when it did it because suddenly this troop that had 100 health, 100 life has like 20 health, 20 life. Every single time you transform somebody, it replaces them with a troop that's essentially half the level. So when you transform somebody, you make them weaker by default, but then you also potentially could make them weaker again. And they get 0 mana because they got transformed, and they're probably transformed into something that is not nearly as useful as what they had in there before. Anyone that's doing team building knows that you're building that lineup of 4 people very specifically because they work well together. So having someone like Possessed King in that lineup, having somebody randomly transformed, or having 2 people transformed, or God forbid 3 people transformed, that completely blows up the team. So it is a low percent chance, but it is 3 separate 20% chances. So more often than not, I would, like, the way that I feel he works, when you cast him, there's like a 50-50 chance in my mind that something happens. And that's like kind of good enough. So realistically, if he had none of this, I would still rate him very highly in this list. But having the ability to potentially save a loss and turn it into a win because of this transform chance just makes him the best troop in the game. But again, this is the primary reason, and I can't overstate enough how important this really, really is. If you have Possessed King and you haven't really used him that much, I strongly encourage you to build a loop-heavy lineup, put Possessed King in it, and tell me it's not better. Because it will be, I promise you. But you can use him in delves, you can use him in events, you can use him in PvP, you can use him in Guild Wars. He's used in every single aspect of the game because it's not important what he does, it's important that he brings this to the table, which just basically strengthens everybody else in the team. So I'm sure people have heard me rant and rave about Possessed King before. I'm going to do it again. Of course, I'm placing him at the top of this list as well. But as far as the overall troops that are the most high value in the game, this is my list. So I think these are the most important. I would argue that this is like the order in which you should prioritize getting people. These are just the best troops in the game as far as I'm concerned. Highest value, most useful in the most places, will enable you to do a lot of different things. So hopefully you found this video interesting, maybe slightly controversial. I'm curious to talk with you guys in the comments section about what you think or how you disagree. I'm sure this will elicit a lot of strong reactions. But either way, this is my list. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.